Okay, good morning. I've just been reminded on Facebook that it was 10 years ago today that I arrived back in the UK after riding from Sydney to London on the 105cc Australian postal bike that had been named Dorothy. And I guess I just wanted to, recap on that trip for anybody who wasn't aware of it or didn't know any details. But that was a trip January 2009. I was in Australia. I'd been out there for about 9 months. Originally, I'd had the idea to ride to Australia on a C90, but had bottled it and had flown there instead. And after 9 months in Australia, trying to find a way to stay and running out of options, I eventually decided to ride home on the 110 CT110 that I'd bought to get around the city on. It was an adventure done on a whim. 3 days of planning. I decided to do it on the Thursday and left on the Sunday. And that obviously involved getting everything ready for the bike, the bits of tools, bits of parts, bits of spares, camping gear, clothing, that sort of thing. Throwing it all on the bike and setting off on what became a 9 month, 23,000 mile adventure, 18 countries, and finally making it back to England. But that trip was it was being thrown very much at the deep end. Having to get across Australia in quick time in order to make the boat to East Timor, and from there into Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand. At that time, you couldn't pass through Burma, Myanmar, so I had to put the bike on a plane over from Thailand, over Myanmar into Nepal, Kathmandu, then come down into India, ride through India, test the bike's altitude ability in the Himalayas, then drop back down, cross into Pakistan. By that time, I couldn't get an Iranian visa, so there was no passage for me through Iran into Turkey. So I had to figure out the other route, which is up through northern Pakistan into China, and then Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Russia, and that way. Obviously, through China, you need an official guide that meets you at the border and escorts you all the way. And that's something that took quite a lot of processing to sort out. And I think that was the biggest hurdle, always the biggest hurdle with a trip like that, is the bureaucracy, as in dealing with the visas and things like that. It's the riding is a very easy, simple part of it. You just get on and ride, and sometimes that riding is tricky. Say in India where it's hot, or India and it's in the mountains, or remote parts of Indonesia where you can't find places to stay, and then you have to start camping, and then you start to enjoy wild camping. And fundamentally, the riding is, I guess, the easier part. The bureaucracy is the bit that blows your mind when you start to look at that trip. How do you get from here to there? What ferries are possible? How do you get from Australia to East Timor? How do you get across the Indonesian islands? And how do you find your way from Indonesia to Malaysia? And it's just sort of connecting the dots and, where to start on researching a trip like that. Well, it's basically a Google search. Google search on routes that people have already taken, and then looking at what visas you might need, and what visa limitations, looking on Horizons Unlimited, which is a very good forum for data on that sort of thing, or up-to-date information. And then ultimately, it's the hardest part is doing it. It's very easy planning it. It's very easy once you set off, but between those 2 points, I think that's always the hardest part. How do you set off? How do you decide to do a big trip like that? I was very fortunate. I had nothing to lose, and I think that is what ultimately sent me on my way. I had nothing to lose by not doing it. I had everything to gain. I couldn't have flown back to Australia, from Australia to England. I would have been arriving with nothing, a life to rebuild it there. We're setting off on this trip from Australia to England. It was an adventure. It was something. It was a channel to channel, all that frustration and sense of wanting to do something and achieve something, and the challenge of it is always what was prominent to me. The challenge, making it hard for myself, almost making it harder than it needed to be it with the bike, or be it with the budget I had, or the time frame I gave myself, and things like that. So I think you do these trips for the sense of challenge and purpose. The trip gave me a lot of purpose and focus to get to England, and I was very driven to get to England. It would be very difficult, I imagine, deciding to go around the world, or riding from here to Australia, if you had things to give up if you have, like now, I have a family, I have a baby due any second, I have a house, a mortgage, a wife, a dog, there would never be a moment now where I would ever consider going around the world. And why would I? I have everything I want right here. And I think that's where the big trips are born out of, when there is nothing here, where there is maybe sadness here, or anger, or dismay, or something that you need to go out and find something better. And that's, I think, where the drive to do the big trip comes from. For me, and I can't speak across the board, but for me, big trips are born out of bad times rather than good times, and it's the bad times that give you the driving force. Ultimately, these big trips aren't the solution that maybe you set out in hope that they would be. By the end, there is no pot of gold, there is no happy ending. There is just, you've just moved 9 months down the road of your life, and you've got a lot of photos, and you've done a big thing, and then but you still got to fix your problems. And I think that's the biggest mischief of the big trip: oversell that it's somehow a solution to your misery, and it's not. And so for me, after that trip, I was commissioned to write a book, going postal, which got published in Australia, which was a real funny thing to write, because it was a bittersweet trip for me. But after that, put the same bike on a plane to New York, and then rode Dorothy from New York to San Francisco, and then up to Alaska. And that was the trip where I really started to enjoy it. I guess it's a challenging trip. You got to do all the back roads, do Detroit, Chicago, a bit of Route 66, through the Kansas prairies, over the Colorado Rockies. Some great riding there. Through Death Valley, Monument Valley, Grand Canyon, all those sort of iconic locations, and you're doing it on this little Australian postal bike that's been with you from Australia. And that was quite a beguiling experience, and I really enjoyed that part, getting to the coast and then shooting up to Alaska. And they got to Skagway and went, I'm done, that's it, me done. So that's it, 10 years today since I left Australia on a 105cc post bike. No clue how long it was going to take me, no clue if I had enough money, no clue if I knew I was going to do it. It was a complete roll of the dice, and it's kind of worked out alright. So I would say adventures, big or small, the best thing is to do is just to get on with them, because if you've got that in your mind that it's something that you want to do, need to do, I think it's going to happen eventually. And it's just focusing, putting something in place that makes it happen, whether it's booking a flight or quitting a job or doing something to make it happen, to put that date in the calendar and then doing it, really. And that applies whether it's a 2-day trip around Peak District, just book a hotel in the Peak District for one Saturday in 2 months' time, and then it's going to happen. You're going to have that adventure. And I think that's what that trip taught me, that you can't keep going around the world to find your adventure. You've got to find it closer to home, and I think you can do that. That sense of release on a motorbike when you're riding along a beautiful landscape, or meeting new people, or having a spirited ride with friends. That's kind of is what it's all about. The holy grail of the big round the world trip is a smokescreen, really, for the fact that it's just riding a bike. It's just riding a bike, and you can do that tomorrow or next week in your own backyard. And I think that's where sometimes maybe people are a bit better funneling their energy, just getting out on that bike, doing some miles, taking photos, finding some memories, and meeting new people, and that's it, really. So whatever adventure you've got planned, I wish you well on it, and hopefully we all live to tell the tale. So that's it. Gonna make some breakfast. Cheers. One last thing, I didn't intend it as a sales pitch, but I've got a wife and a baby to feed and support, so I've got Long Ride Home, which is a book about my first trip to Sydney to London, and Running Towards the Light, which is about the New York to Alaska trip. You can get them on www.nathanmillward.com. My mum says they're the best book she's ever read. Cheers.